Now we'll start looking at the modern world. Basically, with the Industrial Revolution is with the rise of the modern world and modern times, industrialization. And so basically, as life starts to become uh, much more complex, the art starts to become more complex. There's much more theories and ideas, and all the stuff that starts to go into the art. Uh, so, quite a long list of stuff here. Not all this is in this uh, first lecture, though, because quite a lot to cover. It'll spread out over a series of lectures for what's coming up. So basically, we'll be looking at Romanticism, Realism, Impressionism, and Post-Impressionism. And one of the things that starts to happen in the art world, why there are all these different isms and everything, these movements start overlapping. They are going on at the same time for the most part. And then you start to get movements that react against what's going on. So, one of the first things that happen, the Louvre in Paris, which is today is a museum. It's the first funded museum of its kind, starting in 1793. It was the formal palace of the French monarchy. And so during the French Revolution, when the monarchy was overthrown, it was already full of art, so it became this instant museum. Even the Palace of Versailles that we looked at also became a museum. So starting off with Romanticism, Romanticism is seen as, the Romantics and also Classicism. So Ingres, with his painting, it's kind of a continuation of what the neoclassics were doing, but sort of updating it a little, just sort of by the what was going on at the time. Whereas, the David painting is kind of like, just you could sum everything up in one little sentence. With the Ingres painting, where you get into, the comparing it to a novel where you have a plot and a subplot that start to take place. So some of the ideas behind the paintings and the characters in the paintings, that's we're saying it starts to get a little more complex the way artists are approaching it. And Delacroix, probably the poster child of the Romantics, with liberty leading the people, sort of liberty being an allegory figure. This during the Revolution of 1830. They start to get tired head with the all the number of French revolutions. I'm not going to lie about that one. But Delacroix, composing his image, where we have liberty there, and then basically as you look around, think about what kind of audience was Delacroix painting this for? Who was the intended audience? Who is following liberty? And we have first, there's a woman. She's following liberty. There's a child off to, I guess, by her left hand where she's holding the rifle. Behind the lady, we see kind of a well-dressed man, and by him, more of a guy in more, I guess, sort of casual wear. Oftentimes, I refer to the guy in the top hats like the business owner, and the guy behind him is the worker. So what Delacroix is doing is, portraying these people of different social standings. And even, man, woman, child, it doesn't matter if you're rich or if you're poor. We need to get behind France for, what is best for France. Basically, what takes place here. And then getting into realism, where we have Daumier's Third Class Carriage and Peter Bruegger's The Elder, The Harvest, that we looked at briefly before. But if you remember, the genre scene, and even though genre paintings are about everyday life, there's still sort of this Christian undertone to them. There's something about the reaping the benefits of the bountiful harvest given by God. Whatever it may be, there's some type of undertone going on with the genre paintings. But Daumier, I mean, if you're gonna get real, Daumier's basically, what he is giving us. This is what's real. This is the everyday. And part of the realists were basically, we're going to give you an image that you see every day, something that you would encounter. Some of other Daumier's work is almost kind of like modern day photojournalism in a way. It's just giving you the facts. This is, the life of the third class carriage. This is what it's like for them. It's cramped, not sugarcoating anything, like the Bruegel picture, looking down there, sure, it's, third class or peasants, however you want to say it. But, they're kind of laying out. One guy's kind of taking a nap. Everyone else is just hanging out with their family, having a nice picnic. It's sort of sugarcoating the backbreaking work of, harvesting in fields. Whereas, Daumier is not sugarcoating anything. He's giving you the cold, hard facts of it. Beginning with Manet and the Impressionists. So Edouard Manet's Le Déjeuner Zerbe, or Luncheon in the Grass. So this was a pretty scandalous painting at the time. Basically, if you think about morals, what good moral standing woman would just go out with her friends and strip down to her birthday suit? With these two guys still wearing clothes, and you have another woman in the back who is bathing, so partially nude. So there's just sort of this whole, moral problems with it. Other things, that's this outdoor scene. But if you really break things down, the clothes that the two gentlemen are wearing would let you know that they are students at a university, and even the hats that they have on, those were hats that were meant to be worn inside. They were not really hats that you would wear to go out and about with. So, there's all this wrongness with his painting. Even the lighting, the way he has the lighting in his picture is more of lighting that you would see indoors from artificial lights. So we have an outdoor scene, but yet the people and the lighting are from indoors. So there's, a lot of sort of irony going on. Just plus everything else going on with the two clothed men, the two females, one being completely nude, the other one not being nude, and the one nude woman is staring at you and engaging you. It's sort of like she's pulling you into this whatever freak show thing they have going on that you probably don't want to be a part of. Um, so there's all types of wrong going on with Manet's painting, but those sort of what Manet was purposely doing. He was essentially taking all the wrongness and making you have to deal with it in a way. Um, and part of his argument, if you were to look at Titian's painting and a print done after Raphael's painting, Manet would basically be saying, hey, this is the stuff I had a copy in your art school. This is the stuff I had to look at and go off of to make my first paintings. So I'm sort of a product of what you have, what you're doing. So what is so wrong with my painting if all I'm doing is sort of taking these two different paintings and making them modern day? Part of the argument would be with Titian's and the print after the Raphael is, well, the nude women in these are, goddesses or some type of allegorical female, they're supposed to be nude. A normal woman does not just strip down to her birthday suit when she's hanging out with her friends having a picnic. So, that's the problem with that there, Mr. Manet. But, of course, I mean, it's the other thing Manet did was he challenged the system. The one thing, as we get into the Impressionists, he always challenged the Salon. And the Salon was this governing body that decided what was art, what was good art, what was acceptable art for the public, what was bad art. Manet, about half the times, always seemed to wound up on bad art because his art was not like the Ingres and the Delacroix. He was, that's the stuff that was being accepted. It was like as if art kind of froze in time for like 100 years and there was no innovation and no different ideas or anything new allowed to come in. So Manet, challenging the Salon that they should change things. So that leads us to the Impressionists, Claude Monet, Impression Sunrise. So some of the benefits of the time, because of the Industrial Revolution, we have a rise in the middle class. And so as you saw with the Manet painting, we have the leisurely activities of the middle class. Sometimes what people pair the Impressionism down to. Monet did a lot more landscapes and things like that. But you can sort of see the modern world within the landscape, kind of in the background there. And so one of the things they took advantage of because of the Industrial Revolution was, during this time, artists could finally paint outside. So Monet could set up and do his painting outside and paint the exact colors that he sees. So sort of the thing about Monet, he's painting the right here, the right now, these real colors, these colors as they're happening. So you can have real precise colors, capture the real precise colors in your painting, or you can have exact detail. So he went with real colors, so details kind of lack in his painting. And that's kind of what the Impressionists did, and that was clearly a no-no from the Salon. So the Impressionists just got together and they decided, well, if you're not going to show our paintings, we'll have our own show. And so today we see the Impressionists as these wonderful, colorful paintings. Back then they were like these complete mavericks challenging the system. So Impression Sunrise is kind of where they got their name, because a critic was trying to degrade and belittle them, and speaking specifically of this painting. And so they decided, well, if that's going to degrade and belittle us, then we're going to use that to build us up. That's what we're going to name our group after, that we've made this impression on people. So where does some of the stuff come from for the Impressionists, some of their influence? We'll have to go back and look at East Asia real quick. So starting off in China, because of course China, they're a main powerhouse and they influence a lot of the other East Asian countries. Basically looking at the history of China, which is still kind of going on and being revised. China's history goes back thousands of years, really. And so, kind of paring things down, the terracotta army of the first Emperor Qin. So the first emperor to start to unite all of China, which gets its name from China. This terracotta army that you might have heard of, where there's like over 5,000, well over 5,000 individualized statues of his army. So each person is represented in his army. It's not like they made this mold to cast the terracotta from. So each one is molded, and the facial features, the clothing, like the patterns of the clothes, the types of belts, shoes, anything that you would want to put on to make yourself different from someone else. That's what they did with these statues. So like I said, over 5,000 individualized statues that are set guarding his tomb, although his actual tomb has not really been discovered. Partly they don't want to disturb it out of sort of superstition. So kind of fast forwarding a little bit to the Tang. So during this period where China is influenced from India with the spread of Buddhism. So on the right, the Bodhisattva, Guide of Souls. So the Bodhisattva is chooses not to fully reach nirvana and pass on, but to kind of hang around and help guide other people. So kind of like a saint in a way. They're there to guide and help the other, mortals along the path of enlightenment. And then the temple, one of the things that it uses is a bracket system, so that it's like post and lintel that we looked at with the Greeks, but where the Greeks would have like a copper or a tin little peg holding the column segments together. The bracket system, it wraps around. So like the top part, you can see the 4 posts there. At the top of those posts, there'd be kind of like a little U-shaped thing where the lintel, the long top under part of the roof, would fit down into. So it's a pretty secure, stable building method, and as it sort of spreads, when we look at Japan, the Bakote pagoda, they're able to build these relatively easy multiple story buildings. And so the paintings during the Song dynasty, we get the vertical format. So in Eastern paintings, in a lot of Eastern art, vertical is more preferred over landscape, so more being taller than wider, basically. Um, and they're dealing with the atmospheric perspective, although it's kind of the flattened picture plane. One of the things during this time, it's like all the arts sort of blend together. If you were going to be a good artist, you also had to be able to write good poetry and all, be able to write literature and all this other stuff, so that the paintings become sort of this visualization where your eye, you can kind of see a traveler there down at the lower left of the painting. There's like a little bridge, you kind of follow it to the left, and you see a little traveler. So the whole idea is that your eye would travel through this painting, as your ears would travel through a poem. So we have this little, guide, you're supposed to become this guy and visualize yourself walking across the bridge and up the pathway and up to the building there, the monastery there in the background, and possibly even climb up to the top of the mountain to have this, worldly experience. Looking at Japan, the Shinto, also kind of a life cycle, one of the early religions of Japan, where it also sort of deals with the life cycle in a way. So their representation, pretty geometric, abstract, looking at the figure of a horse, the Hanawa figure of a horse there. And then the inner shrine, and part of that life cycle that carried over not only just sort of the general preaching of the Shinto religion, birth, life, death, it just keeps repeating that. So every 20 years, this inner shrine is ceremonially burned and rebuilt. So not only sort of the ideas behind the religion having the cycle, also the temple itself follows a cycle as well. And then so the pagoda, as the ideas and everything from China start to reach Japan, Japan takes on a lot of the different ideas, the bracketing system, so building pagodas, and taking on Buddhism. So the real tall building there towards the left would be a shrine. So it would have basically like a relic, kind of like a reliquary, like the cathedrals that we looked at. Kind of the same purpose in a way, where it would hold a holy relic of one of the bodhisattvas. And then getting into the splashed ink or the Hibuku technique. So art should be more meditative. You should not approach a painting with a preconceived idea. You should let this painting sort of flow out of you. It should become this intuitive, meditative act. So the one on the right is a little more showing kind of the pure Hibuku technique. The burning of the Senjo Palace, that one, it would have started the same way, but you go and you add some of the finer details after the fact, after you're done sort of putting down the main composition of the painting. You let that flow out. If you try to approach painting with this preconceived idea, your painting is not going to be as genuine. It's kind of the idea behind it. Like I said, they felt it was sort of this meditative act that one should follow. Let this painting flow out of you. And then moving into the Edo period, so Japan, China, Korea, a lot of the East Asian, they were there in self-isolation. They did not really want any type of outside influence ruining what they had. So they all sort of kept to themselves. There was a little bit of outside interaction, but for the most part, they didn't want anything to do with any of the Western world until they were sort of, finally forced into opening up to themselves. And so the Hokusai, one of the just monumental artists of the first part of the 19th century with his woodblock print. Kind of we talked briefly about woodblock printing or relief printing early on. So this is a way, he could make a lot of copies of his image. Hokusai was just this monumental rock star of the time with his all the prints that he made. And they found their ways over into France. So that's why we're looking at the Mary Cassatt as well. So high horizon line, large flat areas of color for the Hokusai and the Mary Cassatt. So the French Impressionists, not only were they sort of challenging the idea with their subject matter, the ideas of art with their subject matter, they're also challenging the way art is made. They were more influenced by the Eastern arts, mainly Hokusai and the other Japanese artists that were making woodblock prints. The largest market were these Impressionist painters. So if you really had the time to sit down and compare the two, other than sort of the subject matter, the question could ask, what's the difference between the two? There's very little difference between them. And so just real quick look at some of the other Impressionists. Renoir. One of the things Renoir liked to look, he liked painting people in the sort of mid to late afternoon. He felt there was much more of a glow that people had. And again, you can see the Moulin de la Galette, these people in middle class, upper middle class, and if you really want to kind of break things down, that are enjoying their leisurely time. There's this new class of people. They got money to burn, a shorter work week, so you start to have actual days off. So they're out to have fun. And the Impressionists, it's like, all right, well, we're going to follow the realists. This is what we're going to paint about. This is our subject matter. Sort of the livelihood and leisurely activities of the middle class. Barrett Marceau, she and Mary Cassatt looking at more of sort of the woman's point of view. In a way, some of the stuff that they painted, men were not allowed into some of the areas, or there was this distinct separation between men and women still. So they sort of give you kind of a peek at what a woman's life was like, where normally you wouldn't get that. One of the other interesting things, I can't remember if I talked about this before, but Barrett Marceau and Mary Cassatt, they were not seen as sort of these token female painters. It's not like They're like, well, we need to have a softer, girly side or something, so we need to have like these token female artists. They were seen as equals. So, of course, like the critics that were trying to degrade them, they would just really degrade Marceau and Cassatt. But if you were to ask one of the other impressionists, who's a better painter, they might say Cassatt or Marceau. They might say, oh yeah, Marceau, I like Marceau's paintings much better than Renoir because, blah, 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 blah. So they were seen as equals. They were not seen as lesser painters. And then Paul Cézanne, as he starts to deconstruct. So now we're getting into the post-impressionism. So they start overlap. They start to overlap. Post-impressionists start up just a few years after impressionism. So Paul Cézanne, while he's giving you sort of these real colors, real exact colors of the right here, right now, like what Monet was doing, he's like breaking things down into simple shapes and simple forms. So he starts the deconstruction. Then Gauguin, he's playing with the emotional side. He's trying to give you something that is much more emotional. So having a red background with Jacob wrestling the angel, much more emotional, much more of an impact with the red. So choosing colors specifically to cause this, reaction by the viewer. George Seurat, where he starts painting with these little dots, little dots of color. So he brings a scientific approach to the art world, where the green area, if you were to look real close, would be a bunch of little blue and bunch of little yellow dots. So up close are all these little dots. As you back away, they blend together to form these colors. So even though you see black on this on the slide, the actual painting itself is not black. It's all these other, dark blues or dark greens, next to some of the complement colors that we talked about before. So he's like layering all these little bitty dots next to each other so that it appears. That's one of the things that Monet talked about. There's no real black, that these shadow areas are made up of all these other little colors. Van Gogh, I mean, trying to create, possibly a visualization of a feeling, so that it's more of a feeling than it is something that you see. So there's big swirls, there's a breeze that blew through the valley, and of course he's also doing the odd thing around the moon there and the stars with all the crazy halo-y looking things. As they actually start the contrasting sort of colors and the strokes and all that, they almost seem to flicker and pulse in a way. One of the things that even Monet was doing in Impression Sunrise, and what some of the other Impressionists did, the way they showed light and the way they interpreted light was almost sort of, in this case, twinkling stars. There's this little blinking, twinkling effect that happens. So some of the things, what about Americans? We're always talking about all these Europeans. What about Americans? So we talked about Mary Cassatt. Mary Cassatt, born in Philadelphia and moved to Paris. Paris was the art capital of the world. So she wanted a career in art, so she got over to Paris. And then Henry Tanner, in the United States, as an African American artist, he was basically seen as a novelty. His work was not taken real seriously. So he goes across the big pond there over to Europe and all of a sudden, they don't care that he's African American. They're enamored with his art. So it's like his career just takes off like gangbusters, and he's like, winning all these awards and getting all this recognition. Had he stayed in America, he would never had that. His career probably just would have puttered out, and we would not be talking about him. But instead, he went to Europe, and it flourished, and it really took off for him. Other mentionables, Thomas Eakins and George Bingham. They both went over to Europe to go to art school and brought all these new ideas and all these innovative ways of painting and looking at art and thinking about art, the way we make art, bringing all that back to America and start to have the sort of European influence on the American art. So that is it. Next, we'll pick up with art in the first part of the 20th century.